Bill, ring that bell. Right, meeting is officially underway.
Okay, now you know today we're having a speaker who's going to be talking about Springsteen, America. So I thought for our inspiration, I would choose a few Springsteen quotes. Now there's a broad range of things one might choose talking about that individual. So I'm going to tell you a few today, and the next time I'm doing the inspiration, I'll tell you a few more just because they were kind of good. The first one is this. Adult life is dealing with an enormous amount of questions that don't have answers. So I let the mysteries settle into my music. Another quote from him is this. Pessimism and optimism are slammed up against each other in my records. The tension between them is where it's all at. It's what lights the fire. So it's telling said. And then just one more. He said, there's a real patriotism underneath the best of my music, but it is a critical questioning and often angry patriotism. So there we see a range, don't we? So that's your inspiration for today.
Again, I'm going to hand the mic back to you one more time to introduce our speaker. Let's see if I can look all the way around without falling down.
Well, now this is a real thrill, I think. Our guest is Dr. Chris Borick. He's a native now of Nazareth. And I heard of him from my wife, who had heard Dr. Borick speak at an AAUW luncheon. And it was on this subject. So she said, boy, Ken, you've got to get him to come to your group because it was so fascinating. And so he's a very prominent individual. And since I've talked to him, I've seen his name in so many publications where he's commented upon because of his knowledge about surveys and polls and so forth. It's really a special part of his life, I think, at this point. He's a professor of political science. I have to take this mask off here. Let me go into better. He's a professor of political science and the director of Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. He's conducted over 300 large-scale public opinion surveys, and they've appeared in numerous publications such as Time Magazine, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post. He's been provided analysis for BBC, NPR, PBS, MSNBC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, and C-SPAN. What a curriculum replay. And he's also done work for lots of very prominent organizations, the CDC and PBS, and some other governmental agencies too, in analyzing some of the things that they need to know about for their data. He did his doctoral work at the State University of New York in Binghamton in the area of public policy analysis. He's had government experience at the federal and local levels, and several books that he's written as well. He currently is at Muhlenberg College, and so if you'll give a welcome to Dr. Borick.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the very warm welcome, Ken, for the invitation to come to speak to the group today. I had the privilege over the years to speak to a number of Kiwanis clubs, lots of our community organizations, including Rotaries and Lions Club. It's some of my favorite opportunities to speak to the communities because they really are, groups like this are bedrock of the broader community environments in the Lehigh Valley and beyond. I'm a political scientist, as you know, we call it social capital. You might have heard of that term, social capital. Social capital is the bonds that we have across groups, across individuals, across communities. And in many ways, groups like the Kiwanis, I kind of establish as the bedrock of social capital. And they bring us in. So it's great to see. I see some old friends too, Mrs. Howard. I don't know if this is good to say, but Mrs. Hutt was my oldest son's kindergarten teacher. And that son that you had years ago was in graduate school.
Yeah.
Sam is Lehigh in graduate school. So there I will. I'll be so happy to hear you loved you. I think if I recall, it was your last class. I think Sam.
2005.
Yes, and that was so we were so lucky to have a chance before you decided to retire. But we did actually have my youngest son. You were still doing ski club and things, so I think we hung out a little bit after.
Right.
So you got
I'm still doing ski club.
Oh, you still that's very.
High school.
That's good. Well, that youngest son's actually living out in Utah in undergrad school now because he's such a big skier. He wants to be in the industry. So you've inspired on so many ways. So thank you to have, and this is also a pleasure. So as Ken mentioned, I'm a political scientist. So I've given probably 15 talks this fall, all on politics, and I'm done. Yeah, there we go. I'll be happy to chat some other time, but we've talked elections out right now, so and all those things. So it's good to have a little chance to talk about some other subject matter for a little while. And as Ken said, I do. So why Springsteen? Why is a political scientist talking about Bruce Springsteen? I'm not a musician. I have no musical skill. I have no musical abilities other than that I like to listen, right, to things. And I'm also interested in America. I was an American Studies major as an undergrad. I teach political science from an American perspective. I'm fascinated by our country. Where we've come from, our history, where we are, the tensions that are part of our country, our story, our narratives are great. And so at Muhlenberg, we don't have a first year writing program or a first year writing class. Like when I was at Penn State undergrad, it was everybody, if you went to college, you kind of had your English 101 class, maybe somewhere there where you had to, your writing class, and it was just all about writing. So Muhlenberg doesn't have that. It's called a freshman seminar program. So there's small classes, about 15, where the students come in their first year and they work with professors across the disciplines on writing, but it's based on a subject area. So faculty teach on a variety of issues. They kind of come up with themes and topics that might be interesting to students. And it's wonderful. I look at the list every year and say, oh, I'd like to take that class. So they asked me to come up with one. And I've taught a bunch. I taught one on I called it Life in the City, where I looked at urban life and the issues that go on in American cities. Then I did one, I'm a big sports fan, so I did one called Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which looked at the sports and American culture and how it's been woven through our economics, our culture, issues like race and gender play across there. So that was fascinating to look at. But I get tired of them after a while. They get tired of me. So I said, well, what else could I look at that? And I've always been a big Bruce Springsteen fan, being I grew up from Scranton, a working class kid, and of that age that, listen, my brothers were a little older. I stole their Springsteen albums in the 70s. I like this guy. I know my first concert I ever saw was Bruce Springsteen in the Born in the USA tour back in the 80s. Took the bus from Scranton to the Spectrum with my girlfriend. Very, big moments in life. I started thinking, well, where is this? So when I designed the class, I was interested to kind of put the theme together. Now, of course, the title was Springsteen's America, but it's not completely about Bruce Springsteen. It's about artists in the U.S. that have been interested in working class life and working class stories, all the way back, to our kind of early stages, our history. So the class, while we do focus on Springsteen at the end, and I'll, of course, talk about Springsteen, very much looks at how artists have discussed the challenges and lives of working class folks. So the first part of this class we do, it's not an artist in the musical sense. We start with Walt Whitman. So I don't know how much folks are familiar with Walt Whitman, but he's kind of the godfather of this lineage that I followed through the class. Whitman is a poet, not a rock star, not a musician, not a folk star. But what Walt Whitman did was really chronicle the challenges of working class artists and Americans in the 19th century. So his poetry is about the challenges. This is the rise of the industrial era, both in the United States and worldwide. And so Whitman is writing about the challenges to artisans, blacksmiths, people that worked with their hands in small-time capitalism, in the relationship with the rise of industries, factories, and the changing of American life, right? The Industrial Revolution changes everything in the world, but it certainly changes the way people work and how they think about their daily lives and how they manage it. So Whitman's poetry is often about that, the tensions, right, of the role of the small artisan, the person that, and for him it was largely male, right? It was just working class individuals, and how they can navigate this changing world and the challenges to it. So if you've ever read, how many have read Whitman? Got some Whitman? Oh, that's good to see. My students are often like, one thing or the other. But Whitman is fabulous as a poet. So if you want to re-kick your interest, pick up a little Whitman, and he really does capture. He's America's poet. He was. It's hard to tell this to students because of the world we're in. They don't even, they can't even relate to my world. I'm in my 50s, like, how I view it. But in the 19th century, he was rock star like. People read poetry, right? People looked to poets for their insight into things, and poetry was much more common. And he, as a poet at the time, was as big as anybody, right? He chronicles the Civil War, right? A lot of the things, the best poetry about the era and the challenges of 19th century America are located there. And he's very much, as I said, person that brought for the first time, and I could say, there's like this true American kind of capture American life, American culture as a poet. There were authors, of course, before that looked at America, but Whitman really does capture it. And he's elevated, right? He becomes this. And he's fought for, by the way, for years and years, everybody based on where your politics was at that time. The 19th century politics is different in many ways than our politics. Everybody claimed him. That's the fascinating thing. People on the right, people on the left, as we might think of it in that 19th century, Democrats and Republicans of the era, which were different, but they claimed him, right? People that were progressives during the period and wanted, changes, claimed that Whitman's theirs, but kind of traditionalists claim Whitman. So that tells you something, right? That's that we see in artists. And so we start by looking at kind of Whitman, and then we follow this evolution in the United States of artists that have been continually interested in thinking about the working man. And we jump around, there's lots many, but we kind of move next to the 1930s and the Dust Bowl, and we turn to Woody Guthrie. So, you're saying today, God bless America. Maybe at some events, I don't know if you ever sing, Is This Land Is Your Land? That's Woody Guthrie, right? So folks that know a classic song and the classic artist. And he really is the voice in another crucial period in America of the challenges of the working class, right? He's in Okie, he's in Oklahoma, he's displaced. This is Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck types of things, right? His family moves and is displaced during this era. He has to move out. And so Guthrie is consummately interested in the plight of working Americans, farmers and others that are being challenged by economic displacement of the Great Depression in that era, and he writes about it, right? He writes about it in so many ways, and tries to tell the stories, right? He's the story. You'll see a connection to Nazareth too. Carries around his Martin guitar, which he takes everywhere with him. That's kind of his. He calls it. Actually has a sticker on it, and this is kind of during the World War II era too. He goes, "This machine kills fascists." And it's a guitar. It's a little sticker on it. The museum might have it. I wonder if they have a picture of it. But anyway, so he's translating Whitman. And not only is he translating Whitman, he is imaging Whitman. His look, if you see Woody Guthrie's look, right? He's wearing the flannel shirts and the hats. There's pictures of him that he actually takes the pose and the look of Whitman. He tries to look like him. He tries to. He's embraced. He's inspired by Whitman in his art, and he wants to kind of take the Whitman-esque approach and apply it to the Dust Bowl era America. And it's really neat to see how he weaves that through his music. and often kind of biting, right? And this is where we get into artists that are biting. So we think of, everybody knows This Land Is Your Land, right? You sing it, the chorus, you know very well, and you say it. But if you read, go back and look, you Google This Land Is Your Land today when you get home, and read the different verses. And it's the first ones, we all know the verses that go with the chorus, right? You know, beautiful imagery, ribbon highways, images of the country. But as he goes through that song, it gets darker and darker. Read the last two verses. It's about his people standing in relief lines during the Great Depression. And he starts questioning. He doesn't say, this land's made for you. He starts saying, is this land made for you and me? He's questioning it, right? He's questioning like a lot of people were during the Great Depression. Lots of people were questioning the system. And he's doing that in his song. And he's questioning kind of things that we think are consummately part of our economic system. He said, he comes to a sign in the song, if you read it, and it says no trespassing on it. So he's wandering and he sees the no trespassing sign. He goes, you know, he says, well, you know, he sees the sign and he goes, and I turned around and I saw the other side. That side's made for you and me, the side with nothing on it. He goes, because I'm not abiding. This is like an attack on kind of property rights, right? That he's looking at, and kind of private property ownership. So Guthrie is very much, you know, as much as we think of him as this kind of folky hero, a critic, and he's looking at it and the system, and he's thinking about it, and really does establish this kind of identity that creates a whole genre. When we think about folk artists in the United States and folk music, moving forward, Guthrie is the spiritual godfather of that, and he gets a lot of accolades, and probably folks that, well, some folks folks know Pete Seeger at all?
Yeah.
Everybody knows Pete. Oh, that's good. My students like I would. Sometimes it's great to have an audience more like me. But Pete Seeger, for example, picks that up, right? He picks that up, and he takes it forward. And Seeger's a fascinating figure, and he's just was still with us up to about 10 years ago. He was saying "This Land Is Your Land" at the Obama inauguration. So he was then lived well into his 90s. But in the 50s, he kind of picks up the Guthrie mantle and tries to deliver it. But he does it in a different way. He's not poor. He grows up wealthy. Pete Seeger, he's like from the Hudson Valley in New York, grows up in a rich family, but he falls in love with the messages of Guthrie and tries to translate them for new audiences, post-World War II audiences. And post-World War II audiences are different. They're a little more affluent. He's taking them to colleges across the country, to college students, and trying to translate kind of Guthrie's hardscrabble voices to the challenges to explain those to different groups, right? So if you're speaking, we went to a lot of elite colleges singing about that and think, what do they know about working class life? What do they know about it? And what Seeger was trying to do was to explain, right? These are the challenges, and take it. And so Seeger really kind of morphs, the working class thing to a new generation, a new audience, and really does deliver. I think he's kind of authentically looks to take forward Guthrie's message. But the person that's most associated often with Guthrie is Bob Dylan. So I don't have to ask you if you know Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
That would be that's an easy one. But Dylan, if you know anything about Dylan in the 60s, where he emerges absolutely trying to duplicate Woody Guthrie. Look at look at pictures of early Dylan when he shows up on the scene in the 1960s out of Minnesota. He has carved a persona that is trying to replicate Woody Guthrie. He sings songs about Woody Guthrie. He goes and he hangs out and lives with Woody Guthrie. Guthrie's dying in the 60s, Huntington's disease, I think. And he's in the hospital, and you get Dylan goes and kind of spends time with him and tries to take everything he can from him, and really does come out as if you read the first kind of versions of Dylan, the first albums, the folk albums, he's talking about a lot of Guthrie-esque issues. But Dylan, as you guess, because you've seen his evolution over time, really does kind of more many ways. He becomes the voice of a generation in the 60s, right? Protest songs. So you think about Dylan's songs in the 60s, the times they are changing, right? blowing in the wind. He becomes kind of this social critic, as like a lot of folks do, evolving from traditional folk into things. And then in classic Dylan, he says, I don't believe in any of it. Dylan's fascinating to look at. He's absolutely brilliant. Won a Nobel Prize for literature, but also could be an ass. And that's Dylan, right? He's an enigma in some ways. So I'm fascinated by Dylan too. But what he does is eventually say, well, my words don't mean anything. You know, you can apply anything you want to them. They're just, he kind of says, well, you see whatever you want to see. I don't acknowledge it. He distanced himself, right, from anything, even though his writing still is very much engaged in it. So it's often, I always tell my students, don't trust the teller, trust the tale. So the teller will tell you whatever they want. The tale, the writing is what you want to look at. And so I always say, look at Dylan's writing rather than what he says, because what he says often doesn't make a lot of sense to it. But further, absolutely, you know, as a writer, I would say unmatched in contemporary writing, even as a Springsteen fan. I think Dylan is exceptional in his art and his poetry. Gets him a Nobel Prize. That's it. But so kind of this lineage goes on, right? The lineage goes on and finally gets to Springsteen in the class, as we talked about. And we think about Springsteen as kind of the inheritor of this long lineage of working class artists. And in many ways, he both makes sense in this role and doesn't make sense in it. One is he's truly working class. He's a New Jersey guy, right? As you would know. I always ask my students, think of an artist more tied to a state than Bruce Springsteen, right? You think, oh, Jersey, Springsteen almost comes to mind, right? And a lot of our students at Muhlenberg are Jersey kids, so and their parents love. That's why they take the class. Their parents make them take it. That's who it is. So Springsteen, you know, emerges from working class. New Jersey is very much, you know, his parents are working class, his family's working class. He grows up in Freehold, a working class town. And so in some ways, he's kind of the type of person, artist that you might think would embrace working class issues and the challenges and the struggles. And he does, you know, a little bit at the beginning, but really what he doesn't come out of the folk tradition. He's not folk oriented. He's inspired by rock artists, right? He's a child. His inspiration are Elvis and the Beatles, right? He's art that way, like lots of people of his generation. He's not really into folk and those types of issues. He doesn't necessarily want to tell the story. So a lot of Springsteen's early albums that you're most familiar with, like Born to Run, they're romantic getaway albums, right? They certainly are situated in working class lives and what's happening to working class folks in places like New Jersey and Pennsylvania and the limits, right? He's always fighting against the limits of life that he sees. And so how does he approach it? Like a lot of people of our generation and that escape. And what's the vehicle? It's really a vehicle, a car, or a motorcycle, right? The songs are all about cars, motorcycles, busting out of Jersey, heading, you know, with tramps like us, we're out there to, baby, we're born to run, we're a Thunder Road, you know, it's a town full of losers, we're pulling out of here to win, all these songs that you would read, Rosalita, these songs that have, you know, like, hey, it's a journey out, right? It's a journey out of the limits of life, and they're romanticized, and they're great rock, right? They last in time. You probably could turn on the radio and hear it and say, know the words to it. I mean, that's impactful, right? That you look at. He's not really that interested at the time in necessarily going into the underlying challenges in a more deeper way, sometimes a more controversial way, when we're going to deal with economics, politics, race, all the factors that are part of the American blood. But what he starts to do, if anybody has followed Springsteen's albums, he like most artists, especially ones with long histories, evolves, right? Artists evolve over time. They just don't stay. If you stay, often you're kind of dated, right? You're okay, you never changed, you never moved. Well, he immediately starts to move. He starts he goes from Born to Run, which is an escape album, to Darkness on the Edge of Town, right? Think about that title, Darkness on the Edge of Town, where he's looking much at what he would consider darkness in American life, and challenging in American life in ways that are a little more biting, a little more difficult than the pure escape songs. He moves into the 80s, and he looks at the issues that dominate today. So early 80s, you got to live. My students, it's all an artifact. You remember the early 80s, right? Pretty tough time economically. We use the word stagflation in my economic classes, right? High unemployment and high inflation together, which economics said shouldn't happen, but it happened, right? In the period. And so he's living through it. A lot of his writing comes out on albums like The River, and Nebraska, an album Nebraska, which are these really kind of deep dives into the challenges of American life and working class issues, and they're hard, right? If folks know the song The River, yeah, we're gonna talk about, my wife, she laughs. So over the years, she's had to listen to a lot of Springsteen. Luckily, she likes Springsteen. We'll be on long road trips, often with the family, and I'll have it on, and she'll say, "You got to put something else on this." Because it's all about limits, right? The River is a song about someone getting, with their high school girlfriend. She gets pregnant. He's working in construction in this time frame. They get married, and it's basically like the little words, So I went down to the courthouse, and for my 19th birthday, I got a union card and a wedding coat. Right? He gets married at 19, and we went down to the courthouse, and the judge put it all to rest. No wedding day smile, no walk down the aisle, type of things. He's just, it's like I'm going into a world with no advancement, right? My Johnstown company that the guy works for, there's no jobs because of the economy, right? It's just he's starting to write songs about the challenges and asking big questions. Why aren't there jobs? Why aren't those things? And he's de facto, even though he says he's not really interested in politics, he's starting to get more interested in those debates, right? Which is challenging for artists to do. And he goes into that space. And what's fascinating, you think, and I start off my class, we think of Springsteen songs that are most famous, right? Born to Run, but probably Born in the USA. Everybody knows Born in the USA, that song. You thanks, or 4th of July, parades, you'll hear Born in the USA plastic. I always start off my class, because every one of my students, even if they don't know a lot about Springsteen, will say, "Oh yeah, I know that song." I go, "Well, do you? Do you know the song?" And everybody knows the chorus, right? Born is an anthem. They even provide it as an anthem. Born in the USA, Born in the USA. And everybody will sing it. And I go, we'll read the words to the song. And I'd ask them, what's the song about after they read it? And for folks that know the song, it's a biting song. It's a biting song about Vietnam vets, and basically coming home after the war, and seeing limited opportunity in the country, right? It's the story of the guy talking, "Hey, I wanted a job, went to see my VA man." What's the VA man say? "Son, don't you understand?" Basically, there's no jobs to do, that it wasn't available, right? It wasn't available to him. He went down to the refinery. Hiring man says, "If it's up to me, I get the job." But he's not getting the job, right? He's not getting the job. So it's the question of, okay, where do I go? Where do I go in the country? And it was, kind of these songs that talk about the challenges. This is where Springsteen starts to write his quote, that King gave him, great quote to look at. He says his work at this time and kind of since turned to the space. He's interested in the space between the American dream, which he's ultimately interested in and believes kind of in the romantic side of him, and the American reality, the limits of life, right? The limits of life. And he says that that's the space, right? That's the space where so much is good to kind of look at. And so his work really turns to those issues. And he writes, I mean, if you follow, and I won't take you through all of it because it's a bit of the time. But Springsteen, and we go through class, we look at how he deals with so many issues since, right? He's dealing with these issues. He's dealing with challenges related to immigration. He's been challenges dealing with race in the US. He's dealing with challenges to economic situations. So he writes a lot during the last decade when the Great Recession happened. Put out an album that was all based kind of on the Great Recession and the challenges of working people during this time period, and how they could move, forward, what limits were there. It's really writing. And he deals, and what's fascinating, right, is, and I'm not going to bring in too much politics, but I'm a political scientist. So this last decade, right, is one that we talk about in politics often as the rise of kind of populist issues, right? And you can't really look at American politics without thinking about populism, in our national politics and a lot of our state politics. And Springsteen, interestingly, is kind of interesting. For years in working class kind of populist ideas. So he writes about this kind of simultaneously, right? And it's hard. I'm not going to have a lot of time to go into it, but he's trying to find this nuanced space. Populism often is kind of an angry revolt against the current system, economic, cultural, whatever it is, right? That you feel like the system has left you behind. So you kind of fight back to it. And it's often kind of, political kind of anger reactions, and that leads to energy and people involved. And that's my political science side, kind of analyzing it. But for Springsteen, he's trying to navigate this as an artist, which is really hard, right? Because some of his audience might be conservative, some might be liberal, some might be moderate, some might be apolitical. So how does he weave that in, right? And he has some beautiful, efforts to do this in my mind. He writes this song called Wrecking Ball. And it's called Wrecking Ball. It was written around about the time, actually, if you read the thing, it's about, remember the Meadowlands Stadium where the Giants played? When they were tearing it down. He's a New Jersey guy, and he played there a lot. And so he's writing, at least on the surface, about wrecking ball and, tearing it down and building parking lots and all the things with it. But he's got some lines in there he starts talking about. And this is one that I think captures his kind of writing in this period right now. He says, hold tight to your anger, but don't fall for your fears. So I'll say it again. Hold tight to your anger, but don't fall for your fears. And what he's saying, I think it's a powerful line, is, hey, you should be angry. They drive you to do things, to engage in the world and be angry about things and outcomes. But don't fall to your fears. And his critique would be, we too often, when we get angry, we fall to our fears. And what do we do when we start falling to our fears? We blame others. We point fingers. It's them. It's those people. That's the problem. And he says that's where we end up. And that's kind of Spring. It's harder. I always say his case is a harder case than sometimes what I might call pure populists that say, yeah, sure, it is them. And we point and we go. And that's kind of where he is in the space right now. And sometimes that could alienate artists and others, but it's fascinating. And so I end the class, by the way, I said, hey, I'm old, as I tell them. You can see by the white on the beard, and Springsteen's older. And so I asked them, who's the next in this lineage? Who's the next? And who will be the next kind of, if I take you from Whitman to Springsteen, who's it going to be? Is it going to be, Whitman's a poet, Springsteen's a rock star, Woody Guthrie's a folk artist. Is it someone in rap? Is it someone in country? Is it a woman that takes up the mantle of the working class, artist? And I don't have answers, but I have them write about it. The last paper is they have to think about it. So that's what it's about. So I'll leave you on that. I don't know who's next, but I know you're eating and I'm done. So thank you so much.
Right, any questions? That was really great.
Thank you so much.
Very, very much.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Relate to each one of those artists.
It's good material, that's
It
it.
is great material.
I don't know if, I'm happy to answer. I don't know if the mic or that just,
Just a quick comment.
You want me to bring it over? Sure. There you go.
Just make sure it's on.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment, when you were talking about some of the artists in, the Dust Bowl and all that kind of thing, Willie Nelson,
Oh my gosh.
another one.
I love, first of all, I'm a big fan. and what an artist to this day, right? You know, I just listened to him a few weeks ago, and captured so much American life,
Yeah.
right? And his voice is.
And he's still out there fighting for the American farmer.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he started Farm Aid, right?
Right.
Think about that. I was talking to my students. That was 1985 when that started.
Yeah.
The other person that started with, if you remember, is John Mellencamp, right? I was lucky enough to see him earlier this year at a small venue in New York. And still a voice, right? You know, that captures kind of that. So there's a lot of other artists, you know, people, my students ask, like Billy Joel, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's a song,
Yeah.
right? Kind of, he's
Yeah.
investing in that space. A lot of artists do, so really great example.
Nothing about music, but as a political scientist, and this may take a whole other.
I'll come back.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on, I'm a Vietnam vet, on the political ramifications of that whole era.
It is such a great question, and you're right. The legacy is so complex and so so worthy of lots of exploration. And there's been so much written, right, and over time on this. And its lasting impact is unquestionable, right? There's a generation that's been defined by it. I was talking with my students today about the 60s, right? And we're in generational change in their generation and what defines. And Vietnam, how do you not see it as something that shaped not only for folks that served like you, but everybody that was in the generation that came out. My brother was a Vietnam vet. And it shaped me, right? Even though I'm 18 years younger than him, but it shaped everything, right, in our family for a while. Just like my dad's a World War II vet, World War II vet, and that shaped everything, kind of defining our family moving forward. And its legacy is deep and complex and nuanced, right? How you think about the effect on how we view everything from foreign engagement to the role of government and in American life to provide, right, for what we do. And Springsteen is very, he is right of the age, right? He actually, if you listen to his narratives of the song, he's always talking about his friends. And there's this powerful, if you listen, it's on his live album where he talks about when he got a draft notice and they rejected him because he blew out his knee on a motorcycle or something. And it came back, it was fascinating that his dad always said, that he was kind of that 60s with long hair and things. His dad would always say, "Oh, I can't wait till the army gets you. I can't wait till the army gets you." And it's a touching moment. And it really does capture the complexity of the war in so many ways, as you very well know. He gets back from going to get his this physical. And he comes back and he was gone for a few days. Dad said, where were you? He goes, well, I went for my physical. I got back and your dad said, well, and he said, they didn't do it. And his dad, and this was kind of hard, he said, that's good. And it's hard, right? Because it's complex. His dad wanted him to, do this, and the army's going to get you. Also realize this is at the time. It's the complexities of it, right? He's a dad that doesn't necessarily want his son. He wants his son to serve and get taught to be a man, but also at the same time thinks about it, right? So I don't do it justice, but its legacy is so fabulous. Thank you. Yes.
It's not so much a question as an answer though. Years ago, I belonged to an international investigators organization. And one of the executive officers along with me was Brian Reed. He was a detective of the Forked River, New Jersey Police Department. And he was telling us at a meeting one time, or just a gathering one time, that his daughter was looking through his class yearbook, his senior year class yearbook. And she's with a bunch of her girlfriends at their house. And she said, "Dad, is this really Bruce Springsteen?" And he says, "Yes, we graduated together."
Well, there's, that's such a great story. Thank you for sharing. It's funny because my students are all from New Jersey, right? And you think, Jersey's, it's a small state, but there's a lot of people in New Jersey. What's it, like 70 million people in the state? And it's, I think there's like 1 degree of separation between everybody in the state and Richmond. One of the students says, you know, wherever, oh yeah, you know, I was at this event and Springsteen was there. I go, how could it be, right? I mean, the odds, it's like.
I went to school in Muhlenberg.
Yeah, oh, there you go, see, there's a connection, 1 degree of separation to do. And he actually, he knew about our class, because a lot of my students had met him at things, and the first time he heard about the class, like one of my students said, well, I'm taking a class on you, and he goes, oh man, he goes, what's it on? And he goes, well, my professor's a political scientist, and he goes, I shrugged his head on that. And he goes, what's about writing? And he goes, oh, that makes sense. That was a little brush with faith.
So, and you're, feel free to recommend if it's your own book, but could you recommend a book for music that speaks to the American story?
Oh my gosh, yeah, my books you don't want, they're like public administration and budgeting. Yeah, that's I recommend them for any, the 11th edition of our book is out this year, a great Christmas gift for all. No, it's not for anybody. Oh, but that's that's a really great, well, I mean, this is gonna sound almost trite or obvious. Springsteen's autobiography that he wrote just a few years ago is illuminating, right? It's illuminating because not only is it his story, but he is fascinated by, music and its impact on American culture beyond himself. In fact, he just came out in the last 2 weeks with a new album that's all covered of 1960s soul music, soul and Motown. Because he was inspired, right? It was actually funny. Jon Stewart, or was it Danny DeVito? Somebody there's a New Jersey Hall of Fame, right? They have the Hall of Fame, and not surprisingly, Springsteen gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I think it might have been Jon Stewart said this. He goes, he's trying to explain Springsteen, and he goes, well, in the 1950s or 1940s, whenever he was born, 2 people came together, Bob Dylan and James Brown, and they had a child. And he goes, it's a little odd, they're both being male and and biracial at the time, very, and he goes, and that child was Bruce Springsteen. And what he meant by it was he's influenced eventually by folks like Bob Dylan, but very much influenced by James Brown. You watch his show, if you ever went to a Springsteen show, and it's the same. He's the theatrics, the kind of the performance, the James Brown-esque. You remember James Brown shows, right? And so he kind of talks about that. So Springsteen, the book itself is a fascinating look beyond Springsteen into American music and its place.
I think pretty soon he's hosting Jimmy Kimmel.
I think he's on this week, right? He was on it, yeah. He and it's really good. I mean, get some performances, but he's very interesting when you hear him analyze how he tries to think about that. But
Yeah,
very good. Yes, sir.
Do you disagree with any Springsteen? Do you disagree with any Springsteen issues?
Oh, it's good, and it's good. You know what? It's actually fascinating to think about which issues he takes up, where he engages, and on what issues he does. He was interesting for a long time. He wouldn't even acknowledge his politics because he sometimes he didn't have it. He didn't even vote for a long time. He wasn't. It was like a typical kid. Said, I'm not interested in that. He was more interested on the issues, but it's evolved, right? He's become more explicitly political in some of his views.
You personally have issues that you disagree with him?
I probably have qualms with some of his analysis about, maybe where he diagnoses things. So I would say yes. The answer is yes.
In what way?
Sometimes, and he's an artist, right? So I'm an academic. And so his diagnosis maybe often is kind of based on reads of situations where he sees maybe a simpler answer than I might, and this might be problematic of being an analyst and a scholar. I might see it in a different way because maybe I'm looking at, I don't know how much Bruce Springsteen looks at data, He's an artist. I'm a social scientist, so I spend a lot of time looking at it. So I don't know if that's an answer.
I didn't know that you had personal feelings and you disagreed.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, not political stuff.
Oh, okay.
A person, you know, as an individual,
Oh,
you say, well, I disagree with Springsteen on this issue.
yeah. And it's actually what's such a wonderful question. You know, a lot of it is what I'm responding to Springsteen is his work, right? I'm looking at his music, his writing, his lyrics and things. So my evaluation of Springsteen is often much based on what his product is, right? Now, of course, he has his own views and interviews with Jimmy Fallon or whoever, and he says things. And that's where I said sometimes I'll hear something and I'll go, well, I don't know if I'm necessarily think that's the right answer. His work, you know, it's actually interesting to think about. And I don't know if it's a binary agree, disagree with evaluating somebody's work, because there's things I think, well, I don't know if I necessarily like how he's framing certain things, and I might do it differently, but it's something that I always enjoy. I enjoy thinking about. So it's good. What a really great question. Thank you.
Dr. Borick,
Yes.
volume, there's no problem. I got mic right up here.
Oh, yeah.
Most people in the room don't even know this, but many of them know that I was a biker for 42 years. My wife and I, Harley riders. And back in the 80s and going to a lot of the Harley rallies and a lot of the Harley events up in the Milwaukee area, I got to know a gentleman by the name of Martin Jack Rosenblum. He was an English teacher at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, but he was also involved with Harleys. So he got hired by Harley. He became the Harley historian. And I got to know him quite well, and I started investing in his music. And he never really got it off the ground. He did a lot of local venues, a lot of bars, and a lot of biker rallies and things. But he wrote like Dylan. And the Chicago Sun-Tribune was at one of his events and said Martin Jack could be the next Bob Dylan. Well, he since went back to teaching and died as a result of some illness that he had. But my wife would hear me playing his music and she'd say, sounds like Bob Dylan.
Oh,
Because that's the way he sounded. He even wrote my name and some stories about me into one of his lyrics and things. And so it was a lot of fun. It was going somewhere, but then it just fell off the earth and never went anywhere.
And that's thank you for sharing, first of all, the story. And what was interesting is, like, think about the pressure of being the next Bob Dylan. He's the voice of a generation, right? It wins a Nobel Prize. And that was just like your friend, that was labeled on Springsteen. So think about that when he came out, when in the early 70s, it was always, oh, here's the next guy. It's the next. That's an incredible pressure, as you said, right? On almost anybody. And Dylan, and you know, this was interesting for Springsteen because he wasn't a folk artist, he was more of a rock, and by that time Dylan had kind of gone electric, right? Made this big switch over. But it was incredible pressure. And his first couple albums, Springsteen's first couple albums don't sell very much at all. They're really good. Trees from Asbury Park and beautiful songs with them, but they don't sell. And so his last chance was really Born to Run in '75. Like his record deal was done. He said, I gotta make this one work. And he does, right? But it's really fascinating to think about the pressure, like your friend. I mean, just being said that you're the next Dylan. It's like, really? Now I gotta come up with
And that wasn't a local newspaper, that was Chicago.
Yeah, that's really, what a great example.
My comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And looking over a little bit about Springsteen, one of the things I saw was that he was being recognized as one of the great poets of our time. And I thought it was interesting that we tend to pigeonhole people as a musician or they're a poet or they're whatever. And that was a great accolade, I thought, for it.
It is, I think so. And he probably, as writers, right? He talks about his writing, he writes about his writing. And we don't know a lot of poets these days, right? If I told you to name great American poets, right? We'd be like, I could probably come up with my hand, I mean, go back, right? We could say a lot of the old ones, Robert Frost, but we don't. So where is poetry located in contemporary times? It's often in music, right? And reading it. I love to read, and in our class, we listen, I have my students listen to the songs, and performance changes lots of perceptions, right? Of how a song and what it means. Like Born in the USA, I have them listen to an acoustic version. of that, just Springsteen playing by himself, totally different song. It's not an anthem, right? Born in the USA is almost wailed. He's like singing it in pain, right? You know, I don't know where to go with it, right? Because I'm a Vietnam vet, right? It's 10 years down the road. There's 10 burning down 10 years. I got no place to run. I got no place to run, which is talking about his Born to Run song, right? I got no place to run. I got no place to go, right? He's like, doesn't see it after the war and trying to capture that, right? But it's poetry. It is poetry. Right? Poetry. Well, thank you so much, bro. Thank you so much.
There's so much that I could resonate. You know, so most of you know, I ride my motorcycle a lot of miles. 2021, it was 40,000 miles. So far this year, it's been 28,000 miles. And a lot of times I'm listening to music, and a lot of times I'm listening to Springsteen. And there's, you know, the complexity of life that we live in has a lot of unresolved things in our minds. And music is one of the ways that I, you know, work those things out or think about them or reflect on them. And, you know, when you were talking about some of his albums, I remember I'm a retired airline pilot. So when 9/11 hit, you know, talk about taking the wind out of your sails. And he came out with that album, The Rising.
20 years ago, by the way.
Yeah. And that, you know, I mean, there's the richness and beauty and profound lyrics in those songs are just.
It is. I mean, we delve into that a lot, right? And it's. Just quick reply about the motorcycle. So Springsteen loves motorcycles, if you can guess. And there's a great story. Really quickly, Billy Joel built him a motorcycle. They're friends, right? And so he built him a motorcycle, and I don't know how good and what help Billy Joel got, but they're friends, and he gave it to Springsteen. And of course, the first time, or one of the first times he took it out, it broke down, and some folks out riding their Harleys come across another rider, and they stop for other riders, and they stop and they go, "Hey, you're Bruce Springsteen." They go, "Yeah, Bruce Springsteen, motorcycle." And he had explained to them, "Oh, Billy told me this," and they took him and they drove him and they took him out the picture as the bikers took those races. So it was a good biker story.
Yeah. That was awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very informative, very inspirational. A lot of great poetry out there, and I often wonder, what would the music put to the words, Walton Whitman's words, what it sounded like. The music brings it to life. So I'm enjoy your lunch there. I hope it didn't get too cold.
Oh, it looks like